To veterans, thank you so much. Your service does not go unnoticed, and your service is very appreciated.
You know, growing up in Oregon, we had this electric fence around our property. Us kids would grab onto it so you could hold on the longest. War feels kind of like that. Puts lightning in your bones and makes it hard to hold on to anything else.
There are three types of people in this world: sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs. Some people prefer to believe that evil doesn't exist in the world. And if it ever darkened their doorstep, they wouldn't know how to protect themselves. Those are the sheep. And then you got predators. They use violence to prey on the weak. They're the wolves. And then there are those who've been blessed with the gift of aggression and the overpowering need to protect the flock.
Tell me I've led a good life. Tell me I'm a good man.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural. We have always told stories about warriors. From the shield-wielding Spartans at Thermopylae, to the fur-clad Vikings rowing their longships toward the horizon, to the quiet samurai walking home after the last duel of his life. Every culture has shaped the figure of the fighter in its own image. These stories are not just for entertainment. They are our way of keeping the archetype alive. The myth that there exists among us a breed of men and women willing to face death so the rest of us don't have to. In those stories, the warrior is never just a killer. He is the guardian at the gate, the watchman in the night, the one who steps forward when the rest of us step back, and when his task is done, when the battle is won or lost, there is a place for him at the fire. The tribe does not abandon him. They know the cost of war, and they have built ways to pay that debt. But we moderns have forgotten. We still make warriors, still send them into the theater of war, the arena of violence, the place most of us will never see. Sure, we pin medals on their chest and we throw parades, and then we let them disappear into the cracks of a society that doesn't know what to do with them anymore. We pretend the war is over for them because it is over for us. The ancients knew better. When a Spartan returned from the field, he was not simply told, "Hey, get on with your life." No. The phalanx was more than a formation. It was a brotherhood that extended into the fabric of their society. The Spartan's worth was not only on how he fought, but in how he trained the next generation, how he sat at council, how he carried himself as a living example of discipline and courage. The battles didn't end when the spears were set down. A warrior's war became the shaping of his people. The Vikings understood this too. For them, the return from the sea was not an ending, but another chapter in the saga. There would be a ritual feast, where deeds were recounted in front of the whole community. Stories were told not just to brag, but to weave the warrior's life back into the mythic fabric of the tribe. Every man's battle was part of a larger story, stretching back to Odin's own wanderings. The warrior didn't return alone. He returned to a role, a name, a place. He knew where he stood, and so did everyone else. The Native American warrior societies had their own ways. Among the Lakota, a returning fighter would undergo purification ceremonies, sweat lodges to cleanse the body and spirit, rituals to honor both the victory and the loss. They understood that war changes a man's soul, and that change had to be witnessed and guided. You could not send someone to the brink of death and expect him to come back unchanged. You had to meet him where he was and walk him home. War was a part of life, but not the whole of it. And so life could be part of war without being consumed by it. Ancient cultures understood something we have forgotten. Warriors are not disposable tools. They are not meant to be wound up, unleashed, and then shelved in some quiet corner until the next conflict. They are human beings who have walked in places most of us cannot imagine. And if you want to let them live, not just breathe, but live, you must make a place for them when they return. And honestly, we have no such place. Today, a veteran comes home to a civilian world that speaks a different language. The bonds forged in the crucible of combat are gone overnight. The clarity of mission, the knowledge that every day had purpose, that's gone too. What's left is a society that tells them to move on without offering them a path to do so. The result is not hard to predict. It's written in the numbers. Grim statistics that do not make headlines for long. In the United States alone, an estimated 20 veterans take their own lives every single day. That is more than the number killed in combat in most years of our recent wars. The battlefield may be thousands of miles away, but for many, the killing field is much closer to home. Suicide among veterans is not a mystery. It is the end point of isolation, of the loss of identity, of being cut adrift from the very society they served. Sure, we're going to call it PTSD, we may call it depression. We just give it names. But those names are labels, not solutions. The truth is far older than any diagnosis. And a warrior without a tribe is a man in exile. Jung would have recognized this. He would have said that the warrior archetype once awakened cannot simply be put back to sleep. It's part of the psyche now, alive, restless, searching for meaning. In ancient times, a tribe provided that meaning. They told the warrior where he fit in the great story. They gave him rituals to mark his transformation. They let him speak his truth in a language they understood. Without that, the warrior lives in a liminal space, threshold between worlds. He has one foot in the realm of the living and one in the realm of the dead. The battlefield follows him home, not in the sound of gunfire or the smell of smoke, but in the knowledge that the part of him that belonged there has nowhere else to go. In the old stories, there is always a return. Odysseus came back to Ithaca. The heroes of the saga sail home. Even Beowulf, though he dies in battle, does so with his people around him, mourning him as their king. The return is essential. It completes the journey. Without it, the story is unfinished. Without it, the hero is not truly a hero, but a casualty. Our veterans are caught in unfinished stories. They have done what was asked. They have played their part in the great and terrible machinery of war. But when they come back, there is no fire waiting, no feast, no place in the circle. The story just stops. And it's in that silence that the desire for death creeps in. It does not have to be this way. We can remember what the ancients knew. We can create spaces, not just physical but cultural, for warriors to step into when they come home. Spaces where their skills, their discipline, their leadership are recognized and valued. We can give them roles that matter, roles that remind them that they are still part of something larger than themselves. This is not nostalgia for some imagined golden age. It is an acknowledgement of something real. Human beings have always needed meaning, and warriors, perhaps more than anyone, cannot live without it. In Sparta, in the communal mess hall, warriors ate together every night, in war and peace alike. In the Viking longhouse, the deeds of the day were spoken aloud so that no man's courage went unnoticed. These were acts of remembrance and reintegration. They told the warrior, "You are still one of us." What would that look like if we tried this now? What if every returning veteran had a place to tell his story, not a therapist's clipboard, but to a circle of people who understood, or wanted to understand? What if we made mentorship a rite of passage, pairing warriors with the next generation, not just to train them in arms, but to teach them discipline, honor, and resilience? What if we honored service not with a handshake and a store discount, but with a lifelong bond of community? Now, some may say this is impossible, that the modern world is too fractured, too busy, too disconnected. But that is exactly the point. Disconnection is the disease. Connection is the cure, and we have thousands of years of human history showing us how to do it. We may not be able to bring back the Spartan phalanx or the Viking symbol exactly as they were, but we can bring back the principle that a warrior is more than the sum of his battles, and that his life after war is part of the same story. We can decide that the return is as sacred as the departure. And if we do not, the silence will continue to claim them. The 20 a day will continue to vanish into statistics, and we will go on pretending that the war is over, even as it rages on in the minds of those we once called heroes. Our ancestors built societies that knew how to carry a warrior home. We can too. But first, we have to admit that we've forgotten how, and that the cost of forgetting is measured in lives. Because the warrior's journey is not just about the fight, it's about coming back from the fight and finding a place to be. Without that, even the strongest will fail. And when they do, it will not be because they were weak. It will be because we left them alone in the dark. Somewhere along the way, we stopped listening. We stopped telling the stories that make pain sacred. We stopped welcoming the wounded back from the underworld and started sending them into silence. But today we'll remember. Today we'll speak of warriors and wounds. This show was never about entertainment. It was never about chasing ghosts or decoding conspiracies for their shock value. It's about the things we bury, the truths that we don't want to face. And I wanted to talk to someone who doesn't treat trauma, but listens to it. Someone who understands that PTSD isn't just a mental illness, it's a message. A myth that's been broken, waiting to be made whole again. Dr. Edward, thank you for coming on my show.
Thank you very much, Brandon, and thank you for your good work with all of your interviewees over the years. And that was a beautiful introduction. So thanking you for that too. We are aligned, and that was just a marvelous way to open our conversation today.
Would you, before we get basically into this kind of the soul wound mythology, these healings that we're going to be talking about, can you tell me about you? What drew you into this work, and basically what is it asked of you?
Whew. Okay. Within our limited time, I will share as much full disclosure as we can achieve. So, I'm going to share the very first, what Jung called big dream that I ever had, because the question for what drew me into this work really began when I was a young child. So briefly, because we'll share many stories today, but I was born in the Bronx, in the inner city in the Bronx in 1951. We lived in a very small tenement apartment. When I was 4 years old, I had a baby brother who was about a year old and sleeping in his crib under the window. It was in the middle of the night. I was 4 years old. The subway was outside, and the traffic noises. But besides that, everything was absolutely still and quiet. And I woke up, and I knew something was in my room. And I looked around, wide awake, and I saw the most beautiful bejeweled butterfly just flying around my room. It was transpersonal. It was suprapersonal. It was large, and it was glowing with what we would today call psychedelic colors. I watched it for a long time. Then I called my parents, and not surprisingly, when my parents got to the room, it went poof, it dissolved. My father, they asked me what was wrong. I told them. My father just grunted and went back to sleep. And my mother told me, no, it was a nightmare. And I said, no, it's not. I really saw a butterfly. I've been watching it, and it's not scary. It's not a nightmare. And she said, be quiet. Nightmares fool us. Sometimes they go on after we awake. Go back to sleep. So that was my first transpersonal experience, and it's about my first memory. I do have a few early memories from that time, but I was different from that moment on. I couldn't say how, but I knew there was an invisible world. I knew sometimes we could see it or it would reveal to us. And my parents quickly taught me, don't talk to the adults about this. Because no, there aren't any magicians, wizards, shamans that we know of in the inner city Bronx. Shut up and go back to sleep. So I kept that to myself, but preciously, and I've been following that my whole life. I didn't learn until my adult years that in ancient Greek, the word for butterfly is psyche, the same as the word for soul. And the soul was sometimes portrayed as a spirit butterfly in us. And of course, there's the goddess like psyche, who is portrayed as a beautiful woman with great wings. So I had a vision of soul at 4 years old. It made me different. It made me mistrust the adult world that I was being born into, but also know there was an invisible world that I wanted to be connected with. And I honestly, sincerely feel like I've been following that butterfly my whole life. So that's what got me into soul work. And I don't know how or why the gods chose this little Bronx street kid and picked him out of his little tenanted apartment building when there was nothing in my history and my family history that would indicate any kind of spiritual election. But it happened and it transformed me. Right. So that's how I originally got into the soul work. Regarding warrior work and warrior spirituality and the soul healing that is necessary for post-traumatic stress disorder, what today we call post-traumatic stress disorder. I got into that because I turned 18 in 1969 at the height of the Vietnam War. I began protesting that war when I was about 14 or 15, early high school. So I never stopped protesting. And I was never against our troops, and I never blamed them. It was wrong, immoral war. We don't have to discuss that at length now. Okay, so I was protesting the war. The student deferments were done away with after my first year of college, and the lottery system was introduced. And I had decided if I had to go to Vietnam, I could only go as a medic. I was willing to do that. My uncle with severe PTSD was a medic at the Battle of the Bulge. That also shaped my life because he was my godfather. And he never said a sane word to me. I was just around him with his PTSD, absorbing his energy and his lifelong suffering. So I didn't have to serve. So I got a high lottery number and I didn't have to serve. I would have been willing to be a medic. I was still protesting the war and didn't believe in it. I was applying for conscientious objector and would have gladly given 2 years of alternative service, but I never had to do any of it, my friend. So flash forward, I graduated with my master's degree in psychology in 1975, the year the war ended, and God bless us, happy 50th anniversary to the world for the end of the war. I was a young psychologist. I moved to a rural part of central New York State. I was invited into a medical practice as the therapist, and this is 1976, 77, Vietnam veterans started to come into my practice. And they were very severely disturbed, angry, many acting out. We had a lot of violence at the time. Colleagues and friends warned me, don't work with them. But I thought that was a betrayal. Of course I want to work with them. I was willing to serve as a medic. Well, I can do my best to be a home front doc. I'm a therapist and a humanist, so I want to work on the invisible wounds, not the physical wounds. And I had never given my service. And, this is a way I can give national service to our country, to our veterans, to my generation, and really learn what deep trauma and the war experience is like emotionally, imaginally, spiritually, without having to go through that hell myself directly. So that began in, as I said, mid-1970s. PTSD was not created as a modern diagnosis until 1980. So I was one of the early folks working with our wounded warriors before we even had a name for the wound. And from the very beginning, I was, reading the war literature of the world, meeting older veterans from other wars, researching how war and warriorhood was treated around the world, and especially how warriors were brought home in traditional and indigenous and spiritually based societies. So I was preparing myself for this life's work, and I didn't even know it. But there it was. So that's how I got started. That became from soul work to alternative service to seeking the greatest possible healing and homecoming for our warriors, and understanding and embracing that what we call PTSD is profoundly a soul wound, spiritual damage that we can, with the right holistic and spiritually based practices, transform.
Yeah, and you've written at length that PTSD is not just a mental disorder. It's more of like a moral or spiritual wound, injury, really. So basically, I'm saying that it's not something that's wrong with a person, but something that has happened to them, changed them. And you spoke of how PTSD is more like is a soul wound. Can you unpack that a little bit for the audience?
Sure. Let me begin by saying to everybody, whether you have a traumatic wound or you have loved ones who have them, as Brennan says, PTSD is not because something is wrong with you. In fact, PTSD is proof of your humanity, and your sensitivity, and your aliveness, because nobody should be able to pass through something as hellish as war or prison or concentration camps or severe or ongoing sexual abuse or anything. We can't pass through those experiences unchanged. We can't, and we shouldn't. And the only people, this is well studied, the only people who can go through a war experience and come out unchanged the same way they went in are the psychopathic and sociopathic personalities. Because war is normal for them. That's how their psyche is working. And every one of us will be transformed. So we begin with that. So I call what we call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I translated as that acronym, since we're stuck with it, in two different ways. One is post-traumatic soul distress, and I'll unpack that a bit and then talk about the second translation. What we mean by soul distress is that every one of the symptoms of PTSD is not just something that's misfiring in our brains or going wrong physiologically, or not even basically just psychologically, and reducing it to the individual experience. Every symptom is the soul trying to express itself, its pain, its rage, its anguish, displacement, nostalgia, loneliness, all of those core matters. When we aren't heard, when we can't speak, or when we think the public does, or the family or whoever doesn't want to hear us, all of that stuff goes underground and it turns into our symptomatology. And then what happens in our mainstream medical and psychological communities is just try to treat the symptoms and suppress the symptoms with medications, with cognitive behavioral therapy, with meditation, mindfulness meditation. Good, some of it is good stuff, but it's still mostly only treating the symptom rather than hearing the deep, deep cry of anguish in the soul and translating the symptom back into the soul language. So post-traumatic soul distress, and let's accept the humanness of our survivors, honor how much pain and confusion they are in and they've been in, and hear that this is a soul wound and they are trying to express it the only way that they know how until they go through significant healing. So that's part of the story. Another part of the story, another way I translate the acronym PTSD is post-traumatic social disorder. Because for a number of reasons, whenever it's not just, this is not American, this I hope is universal. Whenever any society uses the majority of its resources and its young people for making war, for causing death and destruction, rather than constructive, facilitative nurturing of the population, well, we're in a social disorder. When we're doing more violence than we're doing good. That's one matter. Second matter is if we don't, also universal, for any society, if any society does not give its warriors everything they need in support, in understanding, in healing, in compassion, in inclusion, when they come home from any form of military action, that's a social disorder. The society is imposing on the wounded warrior its own conditions because it doesn't understand, it doesn't want to use the resources. It isn't giving warriors what they need for homecoming. There's a concept in the philosophy of medicine we almost never hear of, but it's called a disease of adaptation. So what's a disease of adaptation? It's when we develop what we call a disease in order to get along with the external physical or social conditions that are not serving us. Well, veterans can't come home to America. This is about other countries as well, so I'm not being unduly unfair to our country, but we all know this and we struggle with this. Veterans cannot come home to be medicated, ignored, told it's over, get over it, you're safe now, it wasn't that bad. No, we don't want to listen and hear your stories. Just go to work. Even with the GI Bill, go to college. We can't. We can't yet. We need to come home first. We need to be stabilized. We need to be able to think. We need to feel included. Well, no, you've got to go to college and you got to go full time or else you lose your GI benefits. We could go on and on. My point is that the form of PTSD that we have is our surviving warriors' adaptation to a very, very inadequate, unloving, insensitive homecoming. Other cultures, other times and places, and some cultures even today, do a much better job and give their warriors the homecoming they need. Not exclusively, but as you know and the public knows, I've worked extensively with Vietnam veterans. What I just want to say about that right now is I've led 19 healing and reconciliation journeys back to Vietnam. So I spent about a year and a half to 2 years of my adult life post-war in Vietnam, and I've studied with them. How are their warriors doing? How did they bring them home? What's the degree of trauma in Vietnam compared to America? And I've written some about this. I want to do a whole book on this, comparing our two countries. I hope that will be my next book. But anyway, I've studied and written it, and this is unbelievable from our Western psychological perspective, but it's true. I've researched it all over the country. In Vietnam, there is almost, even though the war was there, with so much death and destruction, we lost 58,000 people. We're still grieving. The Vietnamese lost 3 million. We could go on and on. Even with that, there's almost no wartime PTSD in Vietnam. And we could talk for an hour about why not. But their spirituality is in place. Their community is in place. They give even though they're poor, they don't give medications. They give talking circles. People go into their village, to their communal houses in the villages, and everybody gets together and everybody tells their stories, listens to the veteran stories. They've been doing it for thousands of years because they've been invaded by larger powers for 2,000 years. So they've never been the aggressor. That's another reason. Well, I want to correct that a little bit. In 1979, Vietnam did invade Cambodia to stop the Khmer Rouge genocide. So once they were an aggressor, and it was to stop a genocide, once they took over Cambodia and excluded the Khmer Rouge, they gave it back. They weren't trying to, and they still feel bad because the Vietnamese say it's always, always wrong to cross national boundaries into another country. So anyway, they don't have PTSD, and we do to an epidemic degree. They have the physical war wounds they're still trying to recover from. It's still a very poor country. And they're also spiritually healed because comparing American veterans who go over there, I'm really frightened. I believe when I land in the airport, there's going to be their police force waiting to arrest me for the horrible things I did during the war. No, our vets are really frightened. We get there and welcome back. We're so glad you came back. We're sorry you can't heal in America, but we're so glad you came back to Vietnam so we can help you heal. And we all lived the same. These are Vietnamese quotes. We all live the same story. So we are brothers and sisters who survived the same hell. And from now on and forevermore, Vietnamese and American veterans need to become the lips and the tongue of the same mouth, telling the world the same story. This is a vision for the world, Brandon, because one of the major ways we heal the traumatic wound from doing the violence to others is reconciling with the other, realizing we were trapped in the same hellish, traumatic environment where we couldn't do anything but fight and try to kill each other to survive, and that it's both of our stories, and we're each part of the story. And if we can join together and tell each other the stories, and then even tell the larger world the story, there's a possibility really with this kind of model for significant war healing around the world between countries and that have historically been enemies. The Palestinians and Israelis need to do this. I presently work by Zoom with both Russia and Ukraine, and both countries have translated my book, Warriors Return, and are using it. So I'm talking with each of them and each of their warriors, and I'm talking to them about, as soon as possible, talk to each other as soon as possible. And the public should know they want to. They really want to. Unfortunately, we understand that the Russians say, we'd do it tomorrow if the war was over, but we can't now. We're not safe. But we do recognize there are brothers and sisters. We're relatives. And we really want to talk to them and reconcile as soon as possible. So that's a lot.
That's a lot. That's true. I mean, we really don't.
One more thing.
Yes.
One more thing.
For it.
Regarding post-traumatic stress disorder. This wound or this injury is as old as humanity. It's not only about war. It's about any time we experience or participate in or even witness life-threatening conditions. So we know of more than 80 names throughout history it's been given. It's in the Bible. It's in Greek mythology. It's in Roman mythology. Native American tribes were largely warrior cultures. They knew the name, the wound. The Lakota people called it, in their language, Nakinapeapi, which means the spirits left. The warriors emptied of spirit. They knew it was a spiritual wound, and their shamans and medicine people were tasked to bring the spirit back into the emptied warrior. So there is a world history of this, and our modern quasi-scientific psychological interpretation is small and limited and not holistic and excludes spirit and excludes community. And we need to bring all of that back for warrior healing.
Yeah, when we talk about homecoming, there really isn't any kind of anything that happens for soldiers to come back. Some of us today are veterans of Operation Iraqi Freedom, for example, and that's a very similar one. Lots of people come back from the war, and the suicide rates of those veterans is really high. So basically, I mean, they come back, they're given a pill, they're given their discharge if that's the end of their service, and then that's it. There's no rites, there's no ceremony that welcomes them back from the land of the dead, basically. And if I really want to go further into the idea specifically of the story of myth and how it serves as this kind of living psychology. And I remember that Carl Jung had described myth as the natural language of the unconscious. And so it's basically the way that the psyche's telling us truth, right? And it's getting to us before logic can sanitize it. Our collective unconscious can sanitize the unconscious, our own reality, and change these things. J.R.R. Tolkien himself believed that myth was called the primary truth. And I think that's a glimpse, or the way that he describes it's kind of a glimpse into divine reality, right, through story. And I know that you work with using myth, and how do you see it fitting into healing, especially with the kind of soul deep rupture that PTSD represents?
In archetypal psychology or in spiritual healing, well, we work with the archetypes. We work with what you and I and some of us are comfortable calling the gods and goddesses, right? Okay. So for everybody out there, and you have a good, sensitive listening audience, I think we're aligned with this. What Jung called the archetypes, Plato called the forms, the ideal forms. The word archetype comes from ancient Greece. The Greek-Jewish early philosopher Philo invented that word around the millennium. And what it means is arche refers to the original, the first, and type is the typos, the stamp put on something. So the archetype is the primal stamp from the universe put into our psyche, and these forms are eternal and universal. Applying it to our warriors, warrior is an archetypal form, of course. And warrior, we all have warriors, whether we've ever been in the military or not. Even those of us who think we are the kindest, sweetest, most nonviolent people who would never harm a flea, we still have a warrior archetype. Our military trains our warrior archetype in a particular way that is actually, compared to many other militaries, especially violent, especially cruel. We create, it's not insulting any people who served, it's what we do. We teach people to kill. We teach people to hate. And much of our military training is that. All militaries don't do that, and it isn't necessary to teach a person to dehumanize the other, think of them as all the nasty names we've given them. In order to be an effective warrior, it's not necessary. It doesn't work. It doesn't have to work that way. And in fact, for example, in the Buddhist tradition, of course, there are warriors, and Buddhism teaches that war is tragic, but sometimes necessary, and that one should never kill out of hatred or for personal reasons. It's too damaging, and it's too demanding of our spirituality. And unless we are really clean and the reason is absolutely pure and incontrovertible, we'd better not do it. So back to the archetypes. However we're trained awakens and mobilizes the warrior archetype in us, so it becomes one form that it could take. So in American history, well, Native American warriors are, of course, a form of the warrior archetype. The Minutemen at Lexington and Concord were expressions of the warrior archetype. All the way up to right today, our special forces are warrior archetypes in a particular form and trained in that way. The way we don't train and prepare the warrior archetype well. Not at all. Basic training is too damn short. It doesn't have moral and spiritual lessons. It doesn't give our young warriors creative, artistic tools for expressing themselves as they go through service and for graduating into later on. It doesn't give them the spiritual teachings and tools for how warriorhood is an archetype, a spiritual identity, and what its primary values and goals should be, and how to preserve and protect the archetype from being polluted and distorted. Going to mythology. In Greek mythology, there are two deities of war. One, as we both know, one is Athena, the goddess of war. And the Parthenon was one of her temples, of her many temples. In ancient times, when one climbed up to the Parthenon, there were several images of Athena up there. As soon as you went through the gate, the first thing you saw was not the Parthenon, but there was a giant statue of a different Athena. She was called Athena Promachos. And that means on the front lines, in the forefront, protecting. She was the protector. She was a warrior goddess whose job was preservation and protection of civilization and its highest values. She didn't want to aggress, and she grieved her fallen. And in the story, the myth of Orestes, when the Furies were chasing Orestes for killing his mother, for killing his father, and there were generations of what was called blood guilt, taking the life for somebody else who took life, and it never ends, never ends, never ends. Athena was the one who stopped it and said, no more. No more violence from now on. Divine persuasion will be the way we settle our differences. So 2000, or in mythology, more than 2,000 years ago, Athena told us, stop killing each other and talk about it. And we haven't. But being aligned with Athena makes us protectors and preservers, and willing, as long as it's possible, to try to really keep violence as the last resort. That's Athena. Ares is the god of war, and Ares is a berserker. Yeah, Homer called Ares the god who delights in slaughter. And we both know this, brother. Some people really do go into the military because they want to have that experience. They do. So that's also part of the human condition. And Ares is part of us. Too many of our warriors, when they first go into the military, wish to be like Athena. I want to serve our country. I want to preserve and protect the best of us. And they are made into Ares servants. In ancient Greece, depending on what you did and which city-state you were from and what your action was, you might be called a servant of Athena or a servant of Ares. Our warriors, tragically, are largely turned into servants of Ares, and that absolutely guarantees the PTSD wound. Good. Taught to kill first, taught to think about it later, and taught to feel it not at all. And we're human and we're whole people. We can't do that. We try to do that. And so it all goes underground and then turns into the shape of the affliction that now we have and we call PTSD. And as we said, it doesn't look like this everywhere all around the world. It really is to a significant, there's universal dimensions of broken brain. There's cultural dimensions of the final strange shape that you're in and that you come home in, and how your culture treated you on homecoming. That really, that is the final determining stamp of what the wound looks like.
Yeah, it's almost like what we've done is basically exiled the gods into symptoms, right? We've transformed them instead of seeing our warriors coming back as, I don't know, if I maintain the Greek mythology, Odysseus, right? Odysseus washing up on some strange shore, right? We say, hey, man, you're just you're just disassociating, right?
You're right. Yeah. Yeah, and
Instead of
remember when he washed off on the shore, well, several shores, but he had to tell his story before he could go home. And sorry, everybody out there, but Brandon and I declare it's BS that you can come home without sharing your story. You have to share it, and we have to know it. And it has to become our shared warrior mythology. The individual stories of our real human individual warriors become the warrior mythology of the culture. And we need to do that with and for each other rather than let Hollywood do it for us with the nonsense that they give us.
Right. Yeah, I mean, what we're doing is we're not recognizing the descent of Persephone as a guide for depression, right? We take it, we label it, and psychiatry medicates it. And I think it's myth. I think it's myth that's really the ritual. I'm going to call it the ritual container. And I think it's an item that we've lost, right? Because like you said, cultures around the world and ancient cultures had ceremony that invited their soldiers home from death, right? They went out to war, and war usually meant death, and they've yet returned from the land of the dead. And they have suffering, and suffering is sacred. And I think we have lost the important value to frame our own soldiers' suffering as something that is, dare I say, holy.
Yes, it is holy. We have encountered life at its most intense. We have been agents of either life or death, creation or destruction. We have taken the divine powers into our own hands, and we're responsible for that. And inevitably, it transforms us. Be frightened of people who can shrug their shoulders and say, yeah, I did it. It didn't bother me. Oh, my goodness. They're very bothered, and they're very numb and in profound denial. And that can explode at any time. I have so many stories, I'm sure you do too, of really effective, successful homecomings in other cultures with all that they do to bring their warriors home compared to the tragic loneliness and isolation and abandonment that we impose on our warriors.
Yeah, I think if I were to just kind of dig a little bit into myth, kind of through the lens, I'm going to use Tolkien again as an example. He described, and I've only read this word, so I'm going to say it out loud for the first time in my entire life, mythopoeia, the idea that to create myth is to echo the divine act of creation. So do you think that's part of our task now, to not just read old myths, right? Because that's kind of what we're doing here, but to remythologize our culture, yes. to tell, we're trying to tell new stories, right? To reinterpret the old ones, to help the traumatized heal their pain. Is that what we're trying to do?
That's what we're trying to do. And we need stories to do it. And we need our stories to be honored. A few years ago, there was the movie The Green Knight. Remember? Yeah, right. Okay. A retelling of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I'm just going to refer to the opening for our conversation. When Arthur calls Gawain forward to speak with him, and the elder king, and we're in archetypes here, right? The king and the squire, and the initiate. The elder king, who has been a warrior, says to the young man, "Tell me your story that I may know thee." And Gawain's answer then is, I don't have a story yet. Well, protect them all. So many of our young people enlist in the military because they want their story. They're looking to have a meaningful, life-shaping story, a quest. And so even frame military service as, an ancient version of the knight's quest and treat it as sacred, because it is. And if you're willing to give your life for any cause, then you must hold it in highest regard. I was hoping we'd go in this direction, so I pulled out one of Jung's most important quotes so we could get it just right for our friends who are listening. Both of us are referring to it, but here are Jung's words. We are still as much possessed today by autonomous psychic contents as if they were Olympians. Today, they are called phobias, obsessions, and so forth. In a word, neurotic symptoms. The gods have become diseases. All right, that's Jung. And Brandon and Ed say, we have to reverse the process. Yeah, the gods have become diseases. Now let's find the the gods that are in our afflictions. So working with our warriors, I go backwards. What happened to the warrior archetype? How can we purify it and cleanse it and liberate it from the distorted shape that it was given? And as we're both saying, this is relevant to all of our wounds. That is this particular gentleman, Joe? Is he a sex addict or is he possessed by Aphrodite? Is Sally an alcoholic, or does she have a really distorted relationship to Dionysus? And our warriors, Ares and Athena, we could go through all of the gods and goddesses. Hermes, communication challenges and difficulties. Going back to the gods gives us the stories, and how can we say it? Well, restores the sacred dimension to our what would otherwise be called, neurotic struggles in modern crazy society. And so we embrace the god, our goddess in our wounds. We work with their myth, as you've been referring to, right? Persephone's return. What dragged you to the underworld? Was there an aggressor or an abuser? How long were you stuck down there? How did you transform in the underworld? What lessons about life did you learn from your descent? This descent is a death rebirth experience. It's an initiation. It's not just a mental illness that you're trapped with and you just got to treat the symptoms to try to have a comfortable life. It's a transformative psycho-spiritual initiation. And you will be so much deeper and wiser because truth and shadow. We will be moving your shadow into the domain of truth.
Yeah, I was thinking about something there for a second because, we both read Jung, and he had said something about neuroses, right? Neurosis being a failure to live out the myth. And I think that's a valuable thing. We're talking about that. We're kind of circling back and around and looking at PTSD because I think as a layman, psychiatry has a difficulty naming it anything really. We call it PTSD today. We called it in World War II shell shock. I mean, there's names for this, like you have said, cultures around the world through time. But I think it's archetypical. I really think it's archetypical. And I think that it's a disintegration of the self. And not just chemically, right, which is why we're medicating it, but symbolically. And so do you see basically PTSD as this kind of mythic collapse? Is it what happens when someone goes through an initiatory experience like war or violence, but has no framework on how to process it?
Yes. Bingo. Put that in italics and bold. Myths give us the frame for processing it. And myths tell us we are individuals who are, we're individuated and we're broken off from the cosmos in so many ways, and our culture is very guilty of doing that. But myth reconnects us to the cosmos. There's a word in Greek, what you rightly refer to, neither of us can pronounce it. Mythopoiesis. Mythopoiesis. Okay, right. There's also a word in Greek, mythis. It's easier to pronounce. Mythistorema. Mythistorema. Mythic history, but it's one word. So we're not only living our individual history, or as defined in the social setting, we're also simultaneously living a myth. And re-mythologizing our lives is, as we're both saying, it's not telling lies, it's getting to the spiritual truth that otherwise is very, very difficult to express. So yeah, we need to find our myths. We need to find, and there's so many people interested in some aspects of this. What are your spirit animals? Where's your sacred place? Where do you go in your meditation? These are all small, necessary aspects of living a spiritual or mythic life, but we can make it much, much bigger. And I do want all of our warriors to feel like, no matter how you feel about your service and what you had to do and why, those are political questions. None of that is your fault. I wish you to feel yourself to have served as a mythic warrior, seeking to preserve and protect the best of us, the highest aspects of our values and our collective life, and eventually come to honor yourself for that. And embrace that you're a spiritual warrior, even if the place you served betrayed spirituality. One of the Vietnam veterans I brought, who went both to Greece and to Vietnam with me, I could tell we did amazing rituals. He profoundly healed from his PTSD. I just want to share one statement he said in the middle of one of his rituals when we were in an ancient warrior cemetery, and he told our entire pilgrimage group his full story at a sacred place where rituals had happened 3,000 years ago in ancient times. And he told his story there. And the last thing he said, this is where you and I are going together, my friend. The last statement he made to our group was, "From now on and forevermore, I am no longer a Vietnam veteran. I am a spiritual warrior whose tragic service was in Vietnam." Yeah. So he healed his PTSD. He healed from having become a servant of Ares. He fully embraced the warrior archetype. He grew into an elder warrior. Bless him. He's in his late 70s now, and he's very healthy, and he's serving other veterans, volunteering in VA hospitals and running workshops and stuff. So he's continuing to serve. He stayed in the Brotherhood, and he's redefined it as a mythic identity. I am a spiritual elder warrior. Don't reduce me to Vietnam veteran and that stereotype in American minds. I went back, I served there. I know why I served. I know what I did wrong and what I did right. And I love Vietnam and I love our country. And I'm a spiritual warrior and I'm good with it all now. Now I can say it's my mythic history. It's not my traumatic adventure that broke me. It's my mythic history that actually gave me a finished shape as an elder warrior in American society.
Right. It's the psyche really hates meaningless suffering. And I think that in our attempt to understand what has happened, the trauma loops, right? It just goes around and around in circles in our own minds. And it's like the veteran relives the moments that they were at until they get some healing. The abused child blames themselves. And I think the body, if I were to borrow the title book from, I think it's Dr. van der Kolk, The Body Keeps Score. The body remembers what the soul was never allowed to integrate. And it's that what we're working on. And I thought what we could do is we can basically wrap up with a story. There was one you had told, and I heard it years ago podcast that you had interviewed about this this guy. He was in a gunfight, and he killed one of the Vietnamese, and they had a battle flag, and he brought it home.
Yes.
And it left him scarred until he was healed. Can we talk about that as our closing story?
Sure. Thank you. That's a really beautiful and important story. So thank you for remembering it and bringing it to our friends listening today. All right. So I gave a workshop at one of our vet centers. When my workshop was done, the director of the vet center asked me for a private meeting in his office. He shared that he had become an atheist and didn't really have a spirituality, but he was listening and challenging what I said. And he told me that he was tortured by nightmares of the dead, nightmares of the things he had done and experienced and seen in Vietnam. And that after one battle, he had he'd gone up to the body of a fallen Viet Cong soldier and searched it for souvenirs and found the Viet Cong battle flag. It was a homemade battle flag his family or his village had made for him to carry. So this warrior, this American veteran, brought that home and was keeping that as a war souvenir. Well, in our meeting, he said, I don't know why this is happening, and I don't even know why I feel this way, but it's wrong for me to have the flag. I want to send it back. I invited him to come back to Vietnam with me, and he said, and presented himself. And I even told him, you would be welcomed, and people would be so grateful to you. No, I'll never do that for my own reasons, but you're going, will you take the flag for me? So, of course, I agreed to do that. And I let my Vietnamese colleagues know. So the main museum about what the Vietnamese call the American War, and we call the Vietnam War. The main museum about that war is called the War Remnants Museum. It's in Saigon and Ho Chi Minh City. Most of the exhibits there were ours because we took most of the photographs and left all that ordnance and supplies behind. And but I've worked with that museum. I'm close with the director and other staff. So telling them we were bringing this flag back, they invited several Viet Cong veterans to be an honor guard to meet our group and receive the flag and transfer it from American to Vietnamese hands. So we did that with a very beautiful ceremony in the museum. And thank the gods, as it turns out, they were able to read the flag. And we were able to identify the village it came from in the Mekong Delta. And we actually restored it, returned it to the village and to the family of that fallen soldier who said, you've brought, by then it would have been grandfather's soul. You brought our grandfather's soul home. Here in Vietnam, we believe the souls stick to the things that they carry, that famous book, The Things They Carried. In Vietnam, they say, as our veterans are trying to tell us, yeah, our souls stick to the experiences and to our belongings. So, but the Vietnamese mean it literally. The soul will ride its belongings wherever they're carried. So thank you. You brought Grandpa home. We're so grateful. I got back to the States and I got a phone call from our veteran, and he said in very colorful language, what the blank, blank, blank did you do, Tick? Since you took the flag back to Vietnam, I haven't had any more nightmares. It must be so that the souls of the Vietnamese were clinging to that flag and they went home with the flag. And it's not only my nightmares have stopped, I'm actually getting a good night's sleep, and something inside me is at peace in ways I've never been since the war. So there was healing on both sides of the ocean. for the Vietnamese family and the village and their warriors, and solidarity between us, and we're all trying to heal together, and healing that's almost unbelievable in ordinary psychological terms that happened for our veteran, and how peaceful he became. And he became, after that, he had been thinking, I'm not sure how long I want to direct the vet center because I'm still exposed to all the traumatic imagery. And after that, he said, I'm blessed to do this work, and I can stay and continue to serve the younger veterans because finally my soul's at peace.
It's been an amazing interview. I really appreciate your time. I thought we would close on a helpful statement. So if you could say one thing to someone who's currently suffering from PTSD, who feels broken beyond repair, what would it be?
Oof. I'll just be honest and spontaneous about what came right into my heart. Words of Buddha that I see in Vietnam, and we stand by them and work together for healing. Buddha said, hatreds never cease by hatreds in this world. Only by love do they cease. This is an ancient law. Vets, we love you. I love you. Brandon loves you. Be with people who love you. When you're in therapy, damn it, tell your stories. See if your therapist, your helpers, your healers can tolerate the stories. If they can't listen, it's not there's anything wrong with you. It's because they can't listen because they're not exposed to trauma, and you're their teacher. You're their guide. You veterans are our spiritual warriors, and we need you to come home and tell us the truth about what military service does to anyone, and teach us of the darkness that you know and you protected us from. And only that way can we all become whole. We're not whole without you, and you're not whole without us. So come home, you can heal, look for people who understand and love and affirm trauma is a soul wound, and we're working together to take that invisible spear out of your heart and soul and be home and be together.
And is there any way people can get a hold of you? Do you have a website?
Oh, sure.
Contact information you can drop here?
Yeah. So my website is just my name, edwardtick.com. And my email address is also very easy, dredtick@gmail.com. But just DREDTICK, which my son laughs and says, that's Dread, that's not Dr. Ed.
Right. Sure.
So edwardtick.com and dredtick@gmail.
Okay. Wonderful.
Easy.
I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on and having a great conversation today.
Oh, and thank you very much for your invitation, for the good work you're doing, preserving and spreading spiritual wisdom in our world that needs it so badly.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.
To be honest with you, I wasn't sure how I'd feel coming back here. Every day, I think about what you said to me that day on the bridge. I've tried to live my life the best I could. I hope that was enough.